He'd worried that Supreme Excellent Lady Yulin was not the right one to conduct this trial. He feared a lighter touch might let Orokin run wild, yet he had been relatively subdued. And yet, Trazyn felt displaced. A feeling he could not access perturbed him. Reactor coolant sloshed about his innards, as if he'd experienced a hard translation. He felt a strange heat by his hip, and noticed the ritual tile which hung there, the one he'd taken from Orokin, was warm. Odd. "Overlord Trazyn," asked Supreme Excellent Lady Yulin, "do you wish to claim salvage rights?"
Yes, indeed I do, Overlord. Supreme Lady, Adjudicator."
"Are you well, Trazyn?" The Supreme Excellent Lady's oculars folded in concern.
"If the Venerable Trazyn is done," cut in Orokin, "I have evidence to present."
"Please do," nodded Yulin. "Overlord, please sit down. Clearly, what you witnessed on Hashtor has affected you deeply. If you have more evidence to present, you may do so after you have recovered." That did not seem like the worst idea, Trazyn thought. His head felt clogged. His central reactor cycled at a dangerous rate, and that sense of unreality refused to abate. He locked his legs and took the weight off his frame. A seat without a chair.
"My lady," said Orokin, "as you see, Lord Trazyn, a dear friend for many centuries, is having difficulties. Biotransference and the Great Sleep have taken a toll on all of us, I fear. This is but a misunderstanding."
Trazyn stopped, turned his head.
"Misunderstanding? Oh, poor Trazyn. He invited me to conduct research on Solemnes. You see..."
Orokin opened a dimensional pocket and withdrew the Astrarium Mysterios.
"I also have a device. We were comparing them."
Trazyn's eyes found the device and locked there. His sense of being in two places, his void-sick feeling, stopped, as if the Astrarium Mysterios anchored him.
Partway through our symposium, he became confused. Oh, poor being. He accused me of stealing his device, even set his lich guard on me.
Trazyn reached out a hand, bombarded the Astrarium with his spectrometer, received the results.
Of course, I had to defend myself. "He's transmuted it!" roared Trazyn. "You've solved the first puzzle."
He leapt up from his crouch, bending towards the device. Orokin shrank back, and the executioner reached for Trazyn, but he leapt away, opening his projection, adding his spectromantic data.
"The composition is exactly the same. See? The exact same!"
Trazyn snarled as the two component reports joined into one, signaling a 100% match.
"He's lying to you."
All heads turned towards Orokin. He tapped a finger on the Astrarium, calculating his next move.
"Oh, hell," he said.
"The Amonos dynasty," Trazyn paused to let the message sink in, "will not come to claim it." The council and executioner stood, stunned at the dire pronouncement.
"But that alone does not confirm your salvage rights, does it?"
said Overlord Balbec, his voice resonating inside the stasis casket. He raised his head, the golden sketches of waterflowers engraved on his death mask catching the one light.
"We cannot simply claim anything we find. It is lawless, and there may be other interested parties."
"What?" said Trazyn, fighting the void-sick feeling in his internals. The blackstone floor rocked, like a command barge, needing an attitude calibration. He tasted radiation coolant in his mouth. An interstitial alert, overheating on his right hip. Trazyn looked down to find Orokin's tile glowing white-hot, hissing where it had contacted the cold metal of his hip.
"If I may, Overlord,"
said Orokin, stepping into the center.
"From my understanding, the Astrarium Mysterios is exempt from the laws of salvage. It is part of the common heritage owned by all Necron kind."
Overlord Balbec nodded.
"As I said, other interested parties.
Indeed,
Orokin continued.
Lord Trazin has argued quite convincingly that this tomb, should it be found, would be not only a treasure of history, but also a path forward for our kind.
Trazin stared at the burning tile. It nagged at him. He'd seen it before. Images flashed in his mnemonic banks, lighting up his neural cavity with flashes that came and went like sparks from an overloaded power relay. A headdress, power orbs hanging from it like a chandelier, the deep voice of a courtroom orator. He put a hand to his aching cranium. The tile burned through its smoking cord and dropped to the floor.
After all,
said Orokin.
why should the Nihilek control this incredible find? Whoever takes the Astrarium Mysterious should have a chance to seize this once-in-eternity opportunity for power.
Trazin felt the illness recede. It was as if the ornament had been pulling him apart, and, as it smouldered on the floor, he heard the shouts of assent and excitement from the council members. Partisans. Every one of them, thought Trazin. They might claim that they fight for Necrontyr, for the Infinite Empire, or their own kind. But it was a lie. They wanted power. For their pharaons, for themselves. Osuaria murdered her brother and nephews. Zubakar could not feel powerful without conquest. Even the meek high metallurgist Quelker had betrayed friends on the way to his position. Graspers, all of them. And all of them, the fools, thought they could beat Orokin to the tomb. They saw him as an eccentric, half-mad astrologer. But he was so much more dangerous than that. And Baalbek, so rabidly loyal to his own dynasty, was the most mercenary. Baalbek, whom Trazin had backed as adjudicator simply because Orokin had protested so greatly when the council proposed him. All at once, Trazin realized he had been tricked. Orokin had wanted that bias, counted on it working in his favor.
Very well,
said Baalbek.
the Astrarium Mysterious will be owned by all and none. A free object belonging to he who possesses it. Stealing it shall be no crime, killing for it no sin. And whoever opens the crypt may keep its contents for the greater glory of their dynasty.
Orokin looked at him, grinning, and in his core, Trazin knew the chronomancer had bested him. The ritual tile swinging from his shoulders radiated heat so bright it reflected off his long steel bones. And with his mind clearing, Trazin realized what the chronomancer had done. So, it's war, diviner, he sent over interstitial message.
If you can catch me, Archivist.
Chapter 5. Ck3's Proof.
An adept shall not attempt this hex until they have mastered the 9th book of conduction and successfully channel powers of up to 77.777 kepth. If so, disjoint the second and third fingers of the right hand at the knuckle, bending them together to form a diamond to concentrate the energy. Of the two outside fingers, snap them backward at the knuckle like eagle's wings to collect the ambient currents. Once captured, the thumb may be thrust forward, like the antenna on a dish, to direct the energy discharge.
Currents of Ruin. Folio 6, Canto 3. Mandragora. 9,984 years before the Great Awakening. Orange. After 6 centuries, Orokin was sick of orange. It tinted everything in his astromantic observatory, from the black stone floor to the ferroconductive astrolabes, to the dead oculars of the cryptex, now 20 in number, that knelt around the Astrarium Mysterious in concentric layers of octagons. Their repetitive chanting of the 88 theorems buzzed in Orokin's auditory transducers, filtered out so it didn't drive him insane. But the orange light and repetitive chants much as they annoyed him, were necessary. Zatoth's harmonious sphere was a difficult conduction to sustain, especially as a subroutine. It would have taken most of Orokin's neural function to bring it into being, leaving him incapable of analysis. And the orange light it cast, visible no matter the spectrum, was a small nuisance considering it let him conduct his rituals outside the flow of time. For every century that passed outside the chronostatic field, 3 inched by within. Orokin possessed limitless patience for study, lost himself in it. Let the pursuit define him, become nothing but programming and thought that worked the problem. He floated on a suspensor field, fingers positioned in the open eye of sight, perception suite dialed back. Soon, the canoptic wraiths and scarab swarms, ordered to replace fluids and cool reactors every 6.4 years standard, would move in the background as unreal blurs. He surrendered his physical self, allowed his consciousness protocols to slip so his astral algorithm could go forth from his metal frame. Many Necrons could transfer their consciousness. Even the meanest overlord could scry part of his mind through the ocular systems of his warriors and scarabs, seeing what they saw. Trazyn, dead gods burn him, could even transfer his consciousness into new surrogate bodies. Orokin would give 10 worlds to know how the Archivist did that, though he suspected it involved some mean alien artifact rather than personal study. Trazyn was a bore, a clumsy meddler, a mere Orokin refocused. Projection required serenity, a mind clear of the looping subroutines of obsession and anger. Anger, that was his stumbling block. Always there, anger, a spiteful shadow following him to the astral plane. Even when he projected, it tied him to his body. He might lessen it, feel it grow weaker, but fury always stretched out behind him, an umbilical cable tying him to his physical self. He touched it with his astral fingers, lightly, to get a read on its strength.
They should have listened. Bastards! They never...
About normal, then. He was feeling good after his victory over Trazyn. How he'd fooled that hunching sack of mnemonics, calling himself an overlord. What was an overlord to Orokin? A being wrapped in the pursuits of the present, heedless of the future. The anger again. He released, felt himself sink deeper in the autonomic trance. Not always a bad thing, that anger. In some of his most clandestine experiments, hidden from the eyes of the other Cryptek Masters, it had even saved him. Snapped him back to his constructed body when the tides of the cosmos threatened to sweep his astral algorithm out into the vast blackness. A spark whirling up from the fire of existence. Another molecule pressed between the whirring gears of the planets, resigned to the pull of gravitational fields, drifting with the dust of meteor belts and rolling along the curve of space. The chronostatic field helped with that, kept him from diffusing, maintained focus. Focus. Surrender. Relax. Sink deeper. Listen to the droning metronome of your power plant. Listen to the droning metronome of your power. Listen to the droning metronome. Listen to the droning. Listen. Orokin feels it happen. No, not feels. Knows. He moves beyond feeling as his essence slips out of his chill body and into the soft womb of the chronostatic field. Floating free, he looks back at his solid form, still floating on the suspensor field. Head back, closed ocular pointing skyward at the stars that glint through the invisible defense field. Stars, worlds, and fields of space dust, smearing technicolor across the dark sky. It has taken 6 years to achieve this state, and now the work begins. 1st century. The first 100 years pass in deep study. Orokin drifts through his etheric library, heedless of time and physical constraint, disappears into the texts, lives between lines of glyphs as if they are rivers running by him, babbling out their knowledge as they pass. His consciousness alters, as any consciousness does after consuming new knowledge. Learning from long-dead teachers, he is no longer the Orokin who sits floating on Mandragora. The astral Orokin knows, with some melancholy, that this cannot last. That once uploaded back into the body, its systems will reassert themselves, and his older personality will return. He will retain the key knowledge, but much will be lost. Letting that go, he gusts into the works of Numinios, studying his Sephiric script in ways a being of metal could not. These are esoteric works, indecipherable to those enclosed in the physical. Orokin rearranges the glyphs, reading them forward, in reverse, drifting through them to see the encoded backsides. Numinius was a master of transfiguration, able to rework molecules as easily as he'd encoded the secrets in his uncollected works. Line by line, with a tedium that would frustrate a mortal consciousness, Orokin decrypts the tangled code. 90 years of study. Only a small victory. Orokin discerns a theory on the theoretical function of the device, a better understanding of the molecule chains in the metal. According to Numinios, molecules formed at a certain resonance can be tied to celestial bodies, keyed to a certain gravitational signature. Sensing the overlap and alignment of directional pull, they can change depending on their location in the cosmos. Trazin said, Orokin remembers, that certain astrariums opened due to location, and this state change had occurred as he passed through the webway.
Could it be, he thinks, that this location was in the labyrinth dimension? Did I trigger a state change by pure chance?
Finally, something to test. Running a gravitational hex through the networked minds of the cryptex, he aims a gravitational projector at the astrarium, its cradle encircling the puzzle box with graviton rays. He retrieves the logs from his body's onboard gravitometer, running through the fields he passed through on his transit through the webway. 647 field configurations. Orokin sets the graviton ray positions to the first field configuration and fires. The cryptex chanting falters. Orange fire blazes behind their oculars. Graviton beams, bright violet in his astral vision, spill and ripple over the octahedron surface. Nothing. He moves to configuration 2 and fires. On configuration 417, he sees one angle split. It opens like a mouth, revealing a shine of liquid emerald inside the throat of the astrarium, then snaps tight. Close. Nearly there. 418 does it. Without sound, but radiating extreme heat, the astrarium begins to change. Its sharp edges fold outward, turning inside out. Angles disappear, faces fold in on themselves, moving in a way matter should not, grinding, as if it is working against purpose to regress. The octahedron becomes a pyramid once more. It vibrates in the field. The cryptex screams, his mouth smoking. To Orokin's dampened perception suite, it is no more than a loud breath. Another joins the chorus. Like the pop of firecrackers, one networked neural system fails. Then another. They shriek with a pain they should not feel. Orokin shuts the gravitometer down. Cryptech heads fall forward, insensate on steel ribcages. The astrarium is an octahedron once more, wisps of neon smoke twisting from the glyphs in its surface. For a bare moment, it projects a name in the smoking air above the device. Vashani. And a clock. 264 years, 16 hours, 4 seconds. 3 seconds. 2. 1. Apparently, time is no longer on his side. 2nd century. The trace mercury atoms, the crystal buried deep inside the astrarium. Orokin curses himself for his narrowness of thought, rages at his own leisurely sloth until the spite threatens to yank him back into his rigid body. Mercury ions. Crystal. Those elements mean only one thing: a mercury ion trap. A time-keeping device. Buried inside the Astrarium Mysterios, silently counting the seconds, is an atomic clock. It will open again in barely over 2.5 centuries. Whatever he'd done to it in the webway, whether intended or not, had started a countdown. But the gravitational transmutation suggests that it won't simply open at the appointed time. It has to be in an appointed place. Indeed, it is possible, even likely, that his transit through the webway had unknowingly brought the Mysterios close enough to its first keyed location that it had transmuted, even in the dimensional pocket where he carried it. Which is impossible. But then again, it is also impossible that outside gravity affects the webway at all. With this knowledge, Orokin casts his consciousness backward in time, to the beginning of his research. After all, he is a slave of the hourglass now, forced to conduct work under the device's own countdown. If he can make up a century... Only, he finds it still counting down. Not with more time, but less. He quickly reverses himself, shooting his consciousness back to the present. The Mysterios, it seems, has been proofed against chronomancy. An alert interrupts his studies. Automatic defenses detect an incoming meteorite, but spectromantic analysis indicates the object contains living metal. It notifies him of a firing solution.
Greetings, Trazin,
Orokin thinks.
and farewell.
He does nothing, merely watches the defense grid blink to active, then broadcasts that the foreign object has been destroyed. Orokin goes back to his studies. Looks up to see another alert, noticing that 13 months have passed since the meteorite was destroyed. This time, it's a meteorite shower. At least 30 objects hurtling towards the atmosphere. Clearly, the old archivist is trying to run the gauntlet, zip from surrogate to surrogate. Good luck to him. Automated defenses count down the number of remaining meteorites from 30 to 15 to 2. The surface of the chronostatic sphere ripples like a disturbed pond as the backwash of Mandragora's air defense grid lets loose. Doomsday cannons and death rays lance the reality outside. If mortals had been there, their lungs would have cooked breathing the superheated air. All targets destroyed. Orokin dismisses the notice and runs a last decrypt equation on a minor work of Talclus, a rather pedestrian treatise on gridded cryptomantic equations, but necessary background reading nonetheless. Satisfied at his preparations, he turns to the main object of his research phase, the Vishanic manuscripts. They are gibberish, lines of trash glyphs without form or reason, unreadable and obscure, a legend among initiates of the cryptech mysteries. Rumour has it they hold a great secret, but if that is true, Vishani had guarded it well. She had been mistress of secrets and high cryptomancer to the Amunos, the greatest occult encoder of her age. The Vishanic manuscripts are not difficult because of their encryptions alone. It is their layers of encryption. Only 6 cryptechs, including Orokin, have ever decrypted the text. All of their decryptions were different, and all of them were wrong. 2 rendered a list of Amunos tomb worlds. 3 decryptions formed a history of the Amunos dynasty, from 3 different narrators. Orokin's solution, maddeningly, had rendered construction schematics for an impossible ziggurat, one whose structure obeyed only its own warped conception of physics. Load-bearing pillars, thin as thread, heavy materials stacked upon fragile ones, almost a parody of a building. Ages ago, Orokin had even built a scale model in holographic chrysoprase, hoping a geomantic analysis of its angles might lead to an algebraic key. It had not. Vishani was not brilliant because she'd hidden the solution to her manuscript. She was brilliant because she'd encoded many solutions into the text. Indeed, There were masters of the cryptech mysteries who believed the whole thing a joke, a prank to bedevil and occupy rival dynasties, who hoped to learn the secrets of her pharaoh. If it was, she'd miscalculated. Rumor was that during the War in Heaven, a rival cryptech had imprisoned and tortured her to death in search of the answer. The tale went that she promised to tell him. Then, when he leaned close to hear her answer, she'd overloaded her reactor, incinerating them both. Orokin admired the sheer spitefulness of it.
But why,
He thinks,
go through all that for a prank?
especially when one of the 6 translations, the second of the dynastic histories, was the only one to mention Nepereth the Untouched. If the stories are true, if Nepereth lies hidden, it would have been Vishani that spirited him away. And Orokin has no doubt the Astrarium Mysterios is her work. It is too clever, too maddening to have been made by another. Orokin works in a white heat, long obsessed with the Vishanic manuscripts, and Orokin is, if anything, a being of obsession. He devours the text for hidden meanings. It is as if he's never read this text before, and 9 years into the scouring, he realizes he has not. Previously, when he'd studied the Vishanic manuscripts, it had been the hard copy kept in the library of his order, supposedly a direct copy of the one on the Amunos crown world of Hashtor, though there had always been doubts about that, given the secretive nature of the Amunos. It would be just like them to disseminate flawed texts. Indeed, when Orokin had travelled to Amunos to salvage what he could, he had hoped to recover an original copy of the manuscripts. To his eternal horror, Trazyn had got there first. Orokin had been forced to acquire a data copy from their etheric library. Yet, as he reads, Orokin increasingly notices differences. Word orders switched here or there, variant spellings, formatting differences. He reviews the Amunos copy side by side with his own data copy. They are not the same. Vishani was a data sorceress, an encoder the likes of which the cryptech mystics would never see again, floating in the ether, surrounded by code. With a flash of discovery, Orokin realizes he's grasped the revelation, the reason why no one could find another layer of encoding in those 6 decryptions. The data copy is the master document. The hard copies they'd worked on for millennia are diversions. The 6 decryptions were only the first layer of the riddle. And this decryption of the Amunos history is so much more than he'd known. Nepereth was not known as the Untouched simply because his physical form was resistant to the tumors. He was also unmarked in battle, in duels, because he was a projectionist, able through technology and personal focus to cast his mind onto the battlefield as a thought form, a being of energy far more powerful than the poor astral algorithm Orokin has cast. One that did not require a chronostatic field or years of trance preparation.
Think of it,
Orokin muses.
the children sitting on the council hoot and cheer over the prospect of returning to the flesh. We could be so much more, beings of light and power, the eternal lives of the Necron wedded to the souls of the Necrontia. Why return to the ravages of mortality when we could become beings of the ether?
Orokin dives into the esoteric treatise of Vishani, works feverishly, staying rooted, overlaying the countdown on his vision so he remembers the object of his searching. Year after year, Orokin's awe grows. Vishani had been a rare genius. Indeed, were she still operational, Orokin's competitive nature would force him to despise her. Rivalry runs deep among cryptech masters, and he has enough self-knowledge to understand that he is prone to knowledge jealousy. Yet, the dead are no rivals, and he is free to admire the mistress of secrets for what she had been. At least, before she had died so badly. He spends 80 years meditating over her algebraic poetry, floats free through her astromantic maps, admiring the fine detail work of her chrysoprase projections, devours her treatise on the importance of following an order of operations while casting multi-layered quantum shields. At the last, Orokin finds himself shocked speechless that such obvious innovations, the use of a logarithmic spiral in overlapping fields, have not occurred to him. The Mistress of Secrets had been a polymath of unusual talent and singular vision, if a few eccentricities. The logarithmic spiral, for instance. Its shape appears in her chrysoprase reconstructions of the cosmos, whirling galaxies and sucking black holes, making the pattern, when in reality they would be far more wild, and as a motif in her collections of algebraic poetry. And it is mentioned 6 times in the Vishanic manuscripts themselves. Wait. Orokin summons the manuscripts, enters the patterns to access the Nepareth decryption, lays the glyph text out on a 2-dimensional grid, rearranges it via the meter Vishani favored in her algebraic poetry, and then, astral hand trembling, he sweeps his palm in a circle, stirring the floating glyphs, chanting the equation for a perfect logarithmic spiral. Glyphs drift and turn, fold and shift, take new places in a spiral labyrinth of pure equations that slowly wheels in front of his disbelieving ocular. Motes of useless data drip from the wheeling arithmetic thought form, like embers falling from a torch. "Here rests a Theron like no other," one of the kneeling cryptecs murmurs.
Behold, the tomb that holds the one who will end the age of metal,
Another drones.
he lies within.
Another answers.
His incorporeal form lies with eyes open. Nepareth! Nepareth! Nepareth!
They take up the chant. Not a droning rote repetition like the 88 theorems, but an ecstatic ululation steeped in passion and trance joy. Orokin looks around, sees blue light blazing from the eyes of his sleeping cryptecs. Glowing fluid leaks from their oculars and mouths, patters on the black stone floor.
Nepareth! Nepareth! Nepareth!
With a chill, Orokin realizes his empty body has joined the chorus. The wheel of radiant, arithmetic glyphs drifts towards the Mysterios, mates with it as if the octahedron were the natural center of its axis. As they meet, the spiral spins faster and faster, quick as a chariot wheel at first, then rotating with the cutting speed of a circular saw. Glyphs on the Mysterios pulse with internal power. Beams of energy spear out of every symbol and angle, filling the observation deck with a projection that burns with an astral intensity that Orokin cannot look directly at. But he knows what it is. A star map. Trazyn was known throughout the dynasties for many things. Giving up was not one of them. Even before the transition to metal, his fellows considered him notoriously dogged, even stubborn in his pursuits. But immortality had made him relentless, granting a patience that his frail body of flesh could not tolerate. Trazyn was not, in other terms, a coward. His power plant held nothing but scorn for those who deserted an endeavor. But he was willing to admit it when he needed to change his approach. Mandragora, for instance. He had exhausted his options on that score. After his endeavor with the meteor shower, a plan that resulted in a rather unpleasant number of disintegrations, he'd abandoned orbital entry. It was certainly true that the Sortek were jumped-up warmongers with no sense of culture. A middling dynasty at best, coasting on the strength of a few competent generals. And without doubt, they were far too arrogant for Trazyn's liking. But they certainly knew how to build an air defense grid. Sneaking in via the Dolmen Gate proved similarly fruitless. 5 steps past the arch took him into a pack of rather unfriendly canoptic spiders. To ensure he hadn't just been unlucky, he tried twice more, before realizing the swarm lurked around the gate on an endless patrol. After roughly a century, he'd taken stock, stepped back, and considered his options. He'd become too consumed with the puzzle of breaking Mandragora's defenses, and forgotten that the Astrarium Mysterios was a means to an end, not the goal in itself. Become, in essence, the short-sighted buffoon Orokin accused him of being. Because even more than quitters, Trazyn loathed those who lacked imagination. Which is why he'd gathered his cryptex in the Archives reading room, the closest thing to an audience chamber he possessed. They stood around a chest-high table, its sides carved in a turquoise and gold bas-relief depicting the departure of the Silent King. Their tireless legs made chairs unnecessary.
"Start with this,"
said Trazyn, tapping one finger on the tile he collected off Orokin.
"What is its composition?"
Sanet paused, his stylus hovering over his phosglyph tablet.
"There are limits to what I can say, my lord. Certain mysteries of the cryptic order are inviolate. The punishment for revealing them are quite—"
"Sanet," Trazyn interrupted, "you have been to my gallery, yes?"
"I have."
"Then you know that I possess every conceivable apparatus of violence. I believe you asked to be excused from cataloguing the Drukhari gallery, correct?"
Sanet said nothing.
"To wit, if you truly believe the cryptic masters can devise a punishment more horrid than even the most casual selection out of my gallery,
I'm willing to prove you mistaken."
"It's a time tile," Sanet blurted. "When we achieve a certain mastery in a school, we carry tokens of our achievement. The higher the mastery, the longer the chain of tiles."
"Obviously," Trazyn tilted his head. "I am not unfamiliar with the structure of your little cult, Sanet."
"But they are not merely symbolic,"
the cryptech added, pushing his stylus away from him, as if worried he might spontaneously transcribe his own betrayal.
"They are essence totems, forged from whatever substance our school studies. Kybor, over there, is a voidmancer, and his tiles are the distilled substance of the gulf between stars. I am, or rather was, a dimensionalist."
He reverently held up the trail of shimmering purple tiles that swayed from his shoulder.
"These are the blood of the universe, harvested from the wounds created when we tear open dimensional gateways and emblematic of—"
"And this, I assume," said Trazyn, peering at the tile, "is time?"
"Correct, my lord. Pure space-time. When we cast our hexes, the power resonates with these totems."
"Would it still react with its fellows, were it in the same room? For example, if I stole one of Kybor's totems and he channeled a black hole, would the tile heat?"
"Oh, indeed,"
said Kybor.
"The ambient energy of the hex would react with the tile, even if it was not one of mine. It is why cryptex join together in conclaves during battle. The resonance can produce much more powerful hexes. But if it was paired with its fellows, it would certainly demonstrate a strong kingship."
"So, if Orokin used chronomancy while I held this totem, it would become hot?"
"Warm,"
corrected the Voidmancer Kybor.
"To become hot, he would need to have been altering the timeline multiple times, and likely the one holding it would experience ill effects, mismatched memories, extreme discomfort."
"So you're positing he went back more than once?" Trazyn asked.
"You misunderstand, my lord,"
Kybor said gently.
"Chronological manipulation on that scale would not be possible, beyond even the highest practitioners of their school. One trip back takes a great deal of focus and energy. 2 at most, 3
would be needed to make the totem this hot." Trazyn projected a temperature reading saved from his engram banks.
"He is capable, my faithful ones. More capable than anyone expected.
Talented enough to foil the Council's verdict not one time, but at least 3 that I can partially recall." He summoned a projection of the puzzle box.
"And now he has the Mysterios in the crown world of Mandragora.
I have drawn up new formulations for a Mandragora assault,
said Trazen's tactical cryptech, Teknev.
It is well fortified, as your reconnaissance discovered.
An artful euphemism for repeated atomization, Teknev, Trazen smiled. You shall go far. Teknev ignored the compliment.
There are no options below a Legion-level deployment.
Prepare strike packages, said Trazen. Have the option ready. But I want possibilities beyond direct assault. The Mysterios is merely a map, a means to an end. When Orokin does conclude his research, he'll need to come out of his hole to claim the prize. So, how do we find out where he's headed? And how can I counteract his chronomancy once I catch him? No one spoke for some time. The whole table working on the problem in quiet cogitation.
There are,
said Sanet, then stopped to clear his vocal actuators, which had frozen up in the 3-year silence.
There are 2 artifacts that might assist you.
Artifacts, said Trazen, skepticism echoing in his vocals. I have searched the catalogue 6 times. There's nothing.
Not here on Solemnis, my lord,
smiled Sanet.
Forgive me, but yours is not the only collection in the galaxy.
Trazen considered disassembling the cryptech for his impertinence, but if Sanet had felt able to interrupt him, what he had was clearly good. He nodded for the datamancer to continue. When he heard what the being had to say, Trazen smiled. It had, after all, been too long since his last visit. The Canoptic Spider's identification beam swept over Trazen's death mask, reading the signature of his systemic aura. Satisfied, it bowed down in reverence and levitated backward and away, leaving the gateway clear.
Lord Trazen,
it buzzed, crude vocals static-laced from eons of disuse.
Signal my network if you require assistance.
Obliged, said Trazen, and strode through the graven doorway.
Before you access the vaults,
continued the spider,
I have been instructed to play you the following message.
A hatch in the floor opened to reveal an operculum. A broad-shouldered cryptech guttered into existence, the chrysoprase data partially corrupted, so his ghostly, blue-tinged form was missing pieces like an incomplete puzzle.
Hail, Overlord Trazen,
said the image, enormous metal beard waggling as it spoke.
I suspected you might pay us a visit during our slumber.
Transmogrify Horak, said Trazen, though he knew the message could not answer. Leaving a welcome card. You sentimental thing.
It is beyond doubt that you are in your rights to be here. The Archivist of Nihilak, after all, maintains curatorial oversight of the dynasty's vault.
Nice of you to say.
But these are the vaults of the Blessed Giden, not Solemnes. Examine and study what you will. But I have taken inventory of all collections and will notice any absences.
The nerve, said Trazen, not in the least offended. He walked through the projection and continued into the chamber.
We remember well the incident on Thelamis,
continued Horak, speaking to nothing.
And charge you on your honor.
Yes, said Trazen, leaving the scrambled messenger behind. Understood. What he was here for, mainly, could not be carried anyway. The Nihilak treasure houses consisted fully half of Geddon's subsurface structures. Vast and glittering, they spoke of a dynastic empire of breathtaking scope. As Trazen walked the golden causeway, metal feet reverberating off the shining surface of the raised walkway, he passed doorways overflowing with fine objects and precious metals. The chambers within filled until they became impassable. Artifacts of long-dead civilizations stood heaped in piles, their surfaces dancing with the light of glittering gemstones carelessly tossed beside them. On his left, a full-size Necrontyr barge, fashioned from platinum, lay shipwrecked upon a pile of rubies, void silk sails hanging slack in the windless air. Trazyn hated the display. His fingers twitched with the urge to sort, catalogue and display each object in its proper context. But he knew that, despite appearances, Hurak had already done so. This disorganized hoard was an act of feigned carelessness, a bit of theatre to overawe visitors with Nihilak extravagance and abundance. In truth, Hurak had logged and recorded every coin, could probably even tell you if it was head or tail side up. After all, dynasties did not become wealthy by being careless with their treasure. Trazyn dimmed his oculars and walked on to the most exclusive vault in Geddon, the Chamber of the Seer. The great head floated in the center of a spherical vault. Hoses trailed from the neck like dangling roots, pumping luminous magenta fluid in and out of the decapitated beast's severed neck. It was squat and reptilian, large as a temple, and was purported to be the last of its race, though what that race might be, Trazyn did not know. The greatest treasure of the Nihilak, the Yith-Seer. He entered it across the beast's tongue, approaching the resonance chamber built into its open mouth. As he crossed, Trazyn saw the great bulging eyes blink once. It came slow, like a cloud passing over the sun. Trazyn told himself it was not alive. Not really. The thought of it being otherwise was too disturbing. The horror of being kept in infinite undeath merely to fulfill a needed role. Trazyn banished that thought, it being too close for comfort. A circle of black stone chairs stood on the seer's mouth, in case the wash of visions made even the hardy bodies of the Necrons collapse. A living metal dome stretched above the chairs, forced against the seer's palate and keeping its jaws wide open. Trazyn sat and summoned a phosglyph panel, activating the neurographic resonators that shaped the seer's visions into holographic images.
Orokin will find the opening point of the Astrarium Mysterios. I need to know where and when that will happen.
Trazyn's sensor suite recorded a temperature drop. Feathery crystals of frost formed on the chill metal of his arms and hands. Around him, the huge mouth shifted, the living metal ceiling groaning in protest. In the center of the circle of chairs, nestled together like a campfire, the neurographic projectors glowed to life. Static electricity prickled Trazyn's arms, snapping and popping as he moved his fingers to discharge it. Above the images, blurred images morphed and changed, came into being, then dissipated. Tropical canopy, coral atolls, a world of blue and green. He knew it, recognized it.
Impossible,
breathed Trazyn. Trazyn stopped at the artifact gallery on his way out. The object was right where Sanet had said it would be. The Time Splinter Cloak, forged from crystallized shards of time itself. An ancient chronomantic artifact that allowed the wearer to see the matrix of the future. Just the thing one needed to shape their destiny, or negate a particularly troublesome time sorcerer.
I'm sure Transmogrifier Hurak would not mind my borrowing it for a spell, said Trazyn. He is, after all, not scheduled to wake for another 10,000 years.
But just in case, Trazyn activated the security bypass talisman Sanet had provided.
When I'm done, he promised himself, I'll simply put it back. Hurak won't even notice it was gone.
Trazyn left in a hurry. The security alarms were rather loud. Mandragora, subcrypt 3,000 cubits below surface. Orokin checked his hermetic field for the 12th time, ran an operational diagnostic. It came back all clear, repelling both outside atoms and data transmissions, setting the chance of failure at less than 1 in 50 million. He looked at the abominable being before him and knew that that was not good enough. He channeled more power into the field.
And after the battle,
the thing said, its voice chillingly unlike any Necron. Growling, spitting, rusted.
our kind may do what we wish.
You may, said Orokin. I will not force you to return.
Silence. A form moved in the shadow, circling to Orokin's right, the diviner's perception suite picking up the gleam of ocular light on bladed limbs. Orokin tried not to look at it, to keep his ocular focused on the twisted being that floated before him. Yet, subroutine still tried to calculate whether the aberration on his flank intended to attack.
It would be a great service to the dynasty, Orokin said.
I care nothing for this dynasty,
the thing said.
But if you provide things, living things, biologicals for us to kill, we will come.
His objective achieved, Orokin retreated into the tomb's quarantine airlock and watched as the inner door closed and cycled, never taking his gaze off the monstrosities that lurked within. Chapter 6